Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated.
Today, we're going to be looking at something I find pretty fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that you can kind of tell where a company might
It's interesting.
get in trouble based on their CEO's background.
Yeah, it's a really cool, kind of different way to look at this problem.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to environmental and social issues.
Exactly, like those ESG risks.
ESG risks, yeah.
Can really hurt a company.
Yeah, so our source for this is a 2025 article from the Strategic Management Journal.
Oh, cool.
And they were looking at immigrant CEOs and this idea of corporate social irresponsibility, or CSI.
CSI, interesting.
Yeah, so we're talking about all those environmental, social, and governance issues that can damage a company's reputation. And they were using this database called ReapRisk.
Oh.
Have you heard of this?
I have heard of ReapRisk. Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive database.
Yeah, they're tracking these incidents all over the world based on media reports, government data, even reports from stakeholders.
Wow, so they're really getting a broad perspective.
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive look. And, it's interesting to think about because almost half of Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or their children.
It's a huge number.
It is a huge number. And if we look at the S&P 500 from 2007 to 2020, over a quarter had immigrant CEOs.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
Yeah. So, you think about some of the big names out there.
Sure.
You've got Andrew Grove at Intel, Elon Musk at Tesla Safracats at Oracle.
Right. Huge names.
They all kind of fit this immigrant CEO profile.
They do.
So how does that background actually play into all of this?
Well, the research lays out a couple of main ways
Okay.
that this connection could affect how a company behaves.
Okay.
The first one is this idea of place attachment.
Place attachment.
Yeah, and you can probably already kind of get a sense of what that means.
Yeah, I'm thinking like they feel more connected to where they came from.
It's more than just where they're from, though. It's like a deep connection that can shape their actions.
Right, like a really strong bond with their homeland.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does this place attachment actually translate into, actions by the company?
So think about it this way. An immigrant CEO might be more likely to keep a close eye on their company's operations back in their home country.
Makes sense.
Right? They may even invest more resources to try and prevent problems from popping up in the first place.
We want to protect their homeland.
Exactly. They want to protect it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. They might even choose to move polluting facilities away from their homeland.
Really?
Yeah. They're trying to protect it from harm. And we see this kind of place protective behavior in action with someone like Safracats and Oracle's strong support for Israel.
That's really interesting. Does it work the other way too, though?
What do you mean?
Like, if a CEO has a strong negative association with their home country, could they be more likely to engage in CSI there?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah, because we see that in personal relationships, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a bad relationship with somebody, you might be more likely to do things that would negatively impact them.
Yeah, it's human nature almost.
Yeah, so it's only natural to think that could apply to business as well.
It would be fascinating to see if future research explores that angle.
For sure, for sure. Okay, so we talked about place attachment. What's the second way that a CEO's background can come into play here?
The second way is through their social capital.
Social capital.
Okay, so we're talking about those strong networks they've built up back in their homeland.
Right.
Not just business contacts, but those deep personal relationships that they've formed over time.
Okay.
And this social capital can give them a lot of leverage.
In what way?
Well, think about influencing how the media covers any CSI incidents that might happen. Maybe they can downplay the bad news or even keep it out of the spotlight altogether.
That's a little unnerving.
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions about how much power these CEOs might have.
Especially in countries where the media isn't as free to report things independently.
Absolutely. That's a key factor.
So if a company does something wrong, is it really that easy to just keep it quiet?
It really highlights the importance of media freedom and transparency.
Yeah, holding these powerful corporations accountable.
If those checks and balances aren't there, it can be much easier for negative information to be suppressed.
So this all makes sense in theory, but does the research actually show that these mechanisms are really at play?
That's the cool part. They actually tested it.
Okay.
They looked at S&P 500 data from 2007 to 2020, combined it with all those CSI incidents tracked by Reap Risk, and what they found really backed up their hypotheses.
So there's actual evidence that appointing an immigrant CEO could lead to a decrease in those publicly reported CSI incidents back in their home country.
That's right.
That's pretty amazing.
And they found that there are certain conditions that make this effect even stronger.
Really?
Think of them like amplifiers.
Okay. I'm definitely curious to hear about those. But before we get into that, I think it would be helpful to just quickly remind our listener what exactly CSI and ESG stand for.
Oh, for sure. It's easy to get lost in the jargon sometimes.
Right.
So CSI, that's corporate social irresponsibility.
Right.
It covers those actions that can negatively impact a company's environmental and social performance.
And ESG, which we mentioned earlier, is environmental, social, and governance, the three key areas that are increasingly used to assess a company's sustainability and ethical practices.
Exactly. And investors and stakeholders are paying more and more attention to these factors.
Oh, yeah.
When they're making decisions about where to put their money and which companies to support.
So understanding how factors like a CEO's background can influence CSI is becoming even more important.
Absolutely.
It's not just about ethics anymore. It's about real-world financial implications.
Right.
Okay, so let's dive into those amplifiers. You mentioned, what are these special conditions that make the CEO's background even more influential?
All right, so the first one might seem pretty intuitive. It matters when the CEO became an immigrant. The effect is much stronger if they immigrated as an adult rather than as a child.
Oh, that makes sense. You've had more time to build those deep ties to your home country. Really establish yourself and your networks there.
Exactly.
Like someone like Elon Musk, who emigrated from South Africa as a young adult, might feel a stronger pull to protect his home country's reputation.
Makes sense.
Than someone who left as a child.
And that brings us to the second amplifier, the company's existing reputation when it comes to sustainability. If they're already known for strong ESG practices, an immigrant CEO is even more likely to go above and beyond to protect their homeland.
Because they don't want to see that good record tarnished.
Right.
Especially not in a place that means so much to them personally.
Exactly. It's like a double incentive to do things, right?
Yeah, okay. And what about the third one?
The third amplifier is all about the media landscape in the CEO's home country. So if the press isn't very free, if it's easy for the government or powerful individuals to control what gets reported well, that makes it easier for an immigrant CEO to leverage their connections and keep any negative news quiet.
It's almost like they have a superpower.
Kind of.
But for corporate responsibility.
Right. You've got the motivation to protect your home country, you've got the connections to make things happen, and you might even have a situation where it's easier to control the narrative.
That's powerful stuff.
It is, and it raises some questions about accountability. Even if those place protective behaviors are ultimately beneficial for the home country, that potential lack of transparency is still a concern.
For sure. I mean, shouldn't stakeholders have access to unbiased information?
Absolutely.
No matter where a company operates.
It's a tricky balance for sure, but let's come back to those research findings for a minute. Yeah. You mentioned that appointing an immigrant CEO was actually linked to a decrease in reported CSI incidents. Were there any other interesting insights that came out of the study?
Yeah, anything else that stood out to you?
One of the most significant findings, and this is really important to highlight, is that there was no evidence to suggest that these CEOs were simply shifting their CSI activities to other countries.
Oh, that's good. So they weren't just trying to make things look good in one place,
right,
while exploiting another.
It wasn't a shell game. They dug into the data and found no support for that kind of behavior.
So it seems like their commitment to their homelands was genuine.
It does.
Not just some PR stunt to make themselves look better.
Right.
It does make you wonder, though, what happens if an immigrant CEO has strong ties to multiple countries?
Oh, interesting.
Like, let's say they were born in one country, raised in another, and then emigrated to a third. How would that impact their decisions?
That's a great question, and one that this particular research doesn't really address.
Yeah, would we see those police protective behaviors in all three places?
It highlights how complex individual circumstances can be.
Yeah, for sure.
It would be fascinating to see future research explore those types of scenarios.
Yeah, see how those multiple layers of cultural influence might play out in the real world.
Absolutely. It would be really interesting.
It really emphasizes how much more there is to learn about the nuances of corporate behavior.
Definitely.
It's not just about regulations and market forces. It's about people, their values, their histories.
Right.
And how those personal factors intersect with the complexities of global business.
You've hit the nail on the head. This research really challenges us to think about corporate leadership in a whole new light.
It also makes me wonder, if investors start paying more attention to these individual factors, could it actually shift the way companies approach ESG issues?
Possibly.
Could we see boards prioritizing CEOs with strong positive connections to the countries where they operate?
That's an interesting thought.
Knowing that it might lead to more responsible behavior.
As investors become more sophisticated in their understanding of ESG risks and how those risks connect to things like leadership and culture, I wouldn't be surprised to see a shift in priorities.
That's a pretty exciting thought. So what does all of this mean for our listener?
Good question.
We've unpacked a lot of information about immigrant CEOs, corporate social responsibility, and these fascinating mechanisms at play. What's the key takeaway here?
I think the most important takeaway is that we can't ignore the human element in all of this corporate behavior isn't just dictated by market forces or abstract regulations. It's shaped by the individuals who make the decisions, and their backgrounds, experiences, and values matter.
Yeah, we got to look at the people behind the curtain.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really makes you think about all those CEO profiles that we see like on company websites or in business magazines. Are we really reading between the lines enough?
That's a good point.
Should we be looking more closely at their personal stories to understand how those experiences might be shaping their leadership?
I think it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah.
It might not be the only factor, but it could be a valuable piece of the puzzle when we're trying to assess a company's potential for CSI.
So like if you're an investor, maybe this research gives you another angle to think about.
Definitely.
It's not just about financial statements and market trends anymore.
Right.
It's about understanding the people behind the decisions.
It's about recognizing that corporations are made up of individuals.
Right.
Each with their own unique perspective and motivations.
We can't just assume that all CEOs are driven by the same goals or that they operate in a vacuum.
Yeah, their personal journeys can have a real impact on the world around us.
For better or for worse.
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has given you a new lens through which to view those decisions and the individuals who are making them.
I'm going to be looking at those CEO profiles a little differently now.
Yeah.
Instead of just skimming those career highlights, I'm going to be thinking about where they came from, what experiences shaped them, and how those personal connections might influence their decisions.
It's a fascinating area to explore, and this research is really just scratching the surface.
So where could our listener go from here if they're interested in learning more?
Well, they could certainly dig into the REAP Risk database, see how companies they're interested in are doing on the ESG front, or they could even do a little research on the backgrounds of CEOs who are making headlines, see if any of these patterns emerge.
It's like a whole new way to understand the business world.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers and spreadsheets anymore. It's about people and their stories.
And who knows what fascinating connections and insights you might uncover.
That's what I love about these deep dives. They always leave me with more questions than answers.
Haha.
But that's a good thing. It sparks a curiosity to learn more, to dig deeper, and challenge my assumptions.
It's all about embracing that intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
And understanding that the world is full of complexities and nuances. There's always more to discover.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.